June 18th, 1962, 9:23 p.m. The summer heat hung over Harlem like a wet blanket, thick and suffocating. Inside Small's Paradise on 7th Avenue and 135th Street, the air conditioning fought a losing battle against 200 bodies packed shoulder to shoulder. The jazz trio in the corner laid down a slow, smoky version of Take 5, the bass notes rumbling through the floorboards, while cigarette smoke twisted upward through amber light fixtures that hadn't been cleaned in months. Wilt Chamberlain sat at his usual table near the back, laughing with 3 women who hung on his every word. The bartender, an older man named Julius, with hands scarred from decades of broken glass and late-night arguments, polished the same whiskey tumbler he'd been working on for 10 minutes. His eyes weren't on the glass, they were on the front door. Everyone was watching the front door. Because 20 minutes earlier, word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The Italians were coming. Not just any Italians, the Genovese family. And they were coming to Small's Paradise to sit down with the man who controlled every numbers racket, every policy bank, every protection scheme in Harlem. They were coming to meet with Bumpy Johnson. At a corner booth near the kitchen, where the shadows gathered thick and the music played softer, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat with his back to the wall. He wore a charcoal gray suit, perfectly tailored, with a burgundy pocket square folded into 3 precise points. His hands rested on the table, fingers interlaced, calm. A glass of cognac sat untouched in front of him, the ice melting slowly, creating small rivers of dilution that caught the light. Bumpy was 55 years old. His face carried the weight of every negotiation, every betrayal, every body that had dropped in the streets over 3 decades of survival in a game designed to kill men like him.
The distinctive bump on the back of his head, the childhood injury that had given him his nickname, was hidden beneath his carefully maintained appearance, but the intelligence behind his eyes was impossible to conceal. To his left sat Junie Bird, his most trusted lieutenant. Junie was younger, maybe 35, with quick hands and quicker instincts. He'd saved Bumpy's life twice, once in '54 during a shootout on Lenox Avenue, once in '59 when he'd spotted poison before it reached Bumpy's drink. Loyalty like that couldn't be bought. It could only be earned. To Bumpy's right sat Nat Pettigrew, his accountant and strategist. Nat wore thick-rimmed glasses and kept a small leather notebook in his jacket pocket at all times. He knew every number, every percentage, every debt owed and debt paid in Harlem's underground economy. When Bumpy needed to know how much leverage he had, Nat could tell him down to the dollar. The 3 men sat in silence, waiting. Small's Paradise had been a Harlem institution since 1925. Ed Small had built it during Prohibition, and it had survived raids, riots, recessions, and the slow creep of urban decay. The walls were lined with photographs of everyone who mattered: Duke Ellington, Lena Horne, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., Malcolm X. This was sacred ground. This was Black Harlem's living room, and the Italians were about to walk into it. At 9:31 p.m., exactly when they'd said they would arrive, the front door opened. The music didn't stop, but the quality of sound in the room changed. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even Wilt Chamberlain stopped talking, his eyes tracking the 3 men who stepped inside. They moved like soldiers entering enemy territory, alert, aggressive, territorial. The man in front was Vincent "Vinny the Throat" Esposito, a capo in the Genovese family who'd earned his nickname by strangling a rival in a Brooklyn social club.
He was short, maybe 5'7", with a thick neck and shoulders that strained against his suit jacket. Behind him came 2 associates, younger men with hungry eyes and bulges under their arms that could only be one thing. Vinny surveyed the room with barely concealed contempt. His gaze swept across the black faces, the jazz music, the photographs on the walls. His lip curled slightly, a sneer that said everything about what he thought of this place and everyone in it. Julius, the bartender, appeared in front of them. "Help you, gentlemen?" Vinny didn't look at him. "We're here to see Johnson." "Mr. Johnson is expecting you," Julius said, his voice carefully neutral. "Follow me." The walk across Small's Paradise took less than 30 seconds, but it felt like crossing a battlefield. Every eye in the room tracked the 3 Italians as they moved through the crowd. The piano player's fingers never missed a note, but his shoulders tensed. A woman near the bar clutched her purse tighter. 2 men in the corner booth shifted their positions, creating angles, preparing for possibilities. Bumpy didn't stand when they approached. He simply gestured to the 3 empty chairs across from him with one hand, a small, economical movement that somehow commanded the entire space. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said, his voice low and steady, the kind of voice that made you lean in to hear. "You're right on time." Vinny sat first, followed by his 2 associates. Up close, you could see the details that separated these men from the Harlem crowd around them: the gold pinky rings, the silk ties, the Italian leather shoes. They dressed like wealth, but it was different wealth, colder, harder, enforced by structures that went back generations. "Johnson," Vinny said, not offering his hand. "Appreciate you making time." "Time is something I have plenty of," Bumpy replied. He finally lifted his cognac, took a small sip, set it down.
"The question is whether this meeting is worth it." A flicker of irritation crossed Vinny's face. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. In his world, there was a clear hierarchy: Italians on top, everyone else fighting for scraps below. That's how it had always been. That's how it should be. "Let me be direct," Vinny said, leaning forward slightly. "The families are expanding. We're looking to consolidate operations in certain territories. Harlem is one of those territories." Bumpy's expression didn't change. Harlem isn't a territory, it's a community. "Semantics." Vinny waved his hand dismissively. "Point is, we're prepared to make you an offer. You work with us, under our structure. We take 70% of your operations. You keep 30% minus operating expenses. In exchange, you get our protection, our connections, our legitimacy." Nat Pettigrew, the accountant, let out a soft sound. Not quite a laugh, but close. Vinny's eyes snapped toward him. "Something funny?" "The math," Nat said quietly, adjusting his glasses. 30% minus operating expenses is approximately 12%. You're offering Mr. Johnson 12% of operations he currently controls at 100%, and calling it an offer." Vinny's jaw tightened. "You're forgetting the value of our protection." "Protection from what?" Junie Bird asked, speaking for the first time. His hand rested on the table, relaxed but positioned. "We've been protecting ourselves just fine." "For now," one of Vinny's associates said, a kid maybe 25 with acne scars and dead eyes. "But things change. Accidents happen." The temperature in the booth dropped 10 degrees. Junie's hand moved slightly on the table. Nat's eyes flicked toward the kitchen, calculating exits. Bumpy remained perfectly still, his gaze locked on Vinny. "Is that a threat?" Bumpy asked, his tone unchanged, merely curious. Vinny held up a hand to silence his associate. "It's a reality. We control the ports, the unions, the politicians, the police. We have structures you can't imagine. Work with us, you prosper. Work against us." He let the sentence hang. Bumpy picked up his cognac again, held it to the light, studying the amber liquid like it contained secrets. "I appreciate you coming all the way up here to make your pitch, Mr. Esposito. Shows respect. Shows you understand that Harlem isn't just another neighborhood you can walk into and claim." "We're not claiming anything," Vinny said. "We're offering partnership. At 70-30. That's the offer." Bumpy set his glass down. "And if I decline?" Vinny leaned back in his chair, his body language shifting into something more aggressive, more territorial. This was the moment he'd been building toward. His associate shifted too, coiling like springs. "Then you're making a mistake," Vinny said slowly. "A big one. Because we're coming into Harlem whether you like it or not. Question is whether you're smart enough to come along, or stupid enough to." He paused, searching for the right word. In that pause, in that moment of calculation, something ugly rose to the surface. You could see it in his eyes. The contempt he'd been holding back. The superiority he'd been maintaining a thin veneer over. His lip curled again. "We're stupid enough to be like every other nigger up here who thinks they run something." The word landed like a bomb. The jazz trio in the corner didn't stop playing. But somehow the music seemed distant now, as if it were coming from another dimension. The air in Small's paradise, already thick, became almost solid. Every person in hearing distance, and that was everyone. Froze. Junie Bird's hand moved beneath the table. Nat Pegru removed his glasses slowly, carefully, folding them and placing them in his pocket, a gesture he only made when violence was imminent.
At the bar, Julius dropped the whiskey tumbler he'd been holding. It shattered on the floor behind the counter, the crash loud in the sudden vacuum of sound. But Bumpy didn't move. He sat there, perfectly still, his hands on the table, his expression unchanged. If the slur had affected him, if rage was building behind his eyes, if murder was calculating angles and trajectories in his mind, none of it showed. He simply looked at Vinny with the same calm, measured gaze he'd held throughout the entire conversation. The two associates with Vinny both smiled. They thought they'd won. They thought the word had done its job, put the black man in his place, reminded him of the natural order, established dominance. One of them even let out a small snicker. Vinny himself leaned back further, spreading his arms across the back of the booth, claiming space, territorial. "So," he said, savoring the moment, "what's it gonna be, Johnson? You with us or against us?" Bumpy's fingers drummed once on the table, a small gesture, almost invisible. But Junie saw it, Nat saw it, and somewhere in the kitchen, two men who'd been waiting for that exact signal saw it too. "I appreciate the offer," Bumpy said, his voice still that same low, steady tone that made you lean in. "I really do. Must have taken some courage to come up here, walk into Small's Paradise, sit down across from me in my city, in my neighborhood, and make that pitch." Vinny's smile widened. He thought he'd won. "But I'm going to have to decline." The smile faltered slightly. "That's a mistake." "Maybe," Bumpy acknowledged, "but it's my mistake to make." "You don't understand what you're turning down," Vinny said, his voice hardening. "You don't understand the power we have." "Oh, I understand power," Bumpy said. He leaned forward now, just slightly, closing the distance across the table. "I've been studying it my whole life. Power isn't just muscle. It's not just money. It's not just connections.
Real power is understanding your position, your leverage, your environment." "Is that so?" Vinny asked, mockery in his tone. "That's so," Bumpy confirmed. "See, you came up here thinking Harlem was just another neighborhood, another territory, another line on a map you could draw circles around and claim. You came up here with your offer and your threats and your assumptions." "What assumptions?" Bumpy's eyes locked onto Vinny's. "That you were safe." Something changed in Vinny's face. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. A soldier's instinct that told him the tactical situation had shifted in ways he didn't understand.
"That word you used," Bumpy continued, his voice never rising, never changing tempo, "tells me everything I need to know about how you see me, how you see everyone up here. You think we're beneath you. You think we're animals you can control, or threats you can eliminate. You think respect is something you take, not something you earn. I don't need lectures from—" Bumpy held up one finger. Just one finger. Vinny stopped talking. "Small's Paradise has been here since 1925, Bumpy said. "Every person in this room right now knows you. They know what you look like, what you sound like, what car you drove up in, probably what you had for dinner. You walked in here thinking you were making a power play, but what you actually did was put yourself in a room full of witnesses, full of people who are loyal to me, not because I pay them the most, though I pay them well, but because I'm one of them, because I protect them, because I respect them." Vinny glanced around for the first time, actually seeing the room. Every face was turned toward their booth. Every eye was watching, and none of them were friendly. "You threatened me in my own city," Bumpy continued. "Used a word that tells me you'll never see me as an equal, never respect this community, never honor any agreement we might make. So here's my counteroffer." Bumpy leaned back, picked up his cognac, took another small sip. The pause stretched out, building tension, building weight. "You're going to stand up," Bumpy said quietly. "You and your two friends. You're going to walk out that door. You're going to get in your car. You're going to drive back downtown, and you're going to tell your bosses exactly what happened here tonight." "Or what?" Vinny said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "There is no or," Bumpy said. That's what's happening.
The only question is whether you're smart enough to recognize that you're already playing a game you've lost. You're bluffing, Vinny said, but he was already standing. His associates stood too, hands moving toward their jackets. Bumpy didn't stand. He simply looked at Vinny with those ancient, knowing eyes. And then he spoke 6 words. 6 words that would echo through Harlem for decades. 6 words that would be repeated in barbershops and bars, in policy joints and jazz clubs. 6 words that would fundamentally alter the relationship between the Italian families and the black neighborhoods they tried to control. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Vinny froze. His hand was inside his jacket, halfway to the .38 he kept in his shoulder holster. But something about the certainty in Bumpy's voice, something about the complete lack of fear in his eyes, made Vinny hesitate. "What did you just say?" Vinny whispered. Bumpy gestured to the room with one hand. "Every person in here heard what you called me. Every person in here watched you threaten me, disrespect them. You think you're walking out of here because you're tough? You're walking out because I'm letting you walk out. And the only reason I'm letting you walk out is so you can deliver a message." "What message?" "Harlem isn't for sale," Bumpy said. "Not at 70-30, not at any split. This is our neighborhood, our community, our home. You want to do business up here? You do it with respect. You do it as partners, not conquerors. You do it understanding that the people up here aren't subjects, they're citizens, and they have representation." "You," Vinny scoffed, but it was hollow now. "Me," Bumpy confirmed. "Tell your bosses that Bumpy Johnson controls Harlem. Tell them that any operations they want to run up here go through me, with my approval, on my terms. Tell them that the word you used tonight ended any possibility of the deal you offered.
And tell them that if they send anyone else up here with threats, that person doesn't go home." Vinny's jaw clenched. His pride warred with his survival instinct. For a long moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then his associate, the younger one, whispered urgently, "Vinny, we should go." Because he'd finally noticed what Vinny hadn't yet, that the kitchen door had opened, that 3 men had emerged and taken positions around the room, that Julius, the bartender, had his hand beneath the counter, that Wilt Chamberlain, 7 feet tall and infinitely capable, had stood up from his table, that every exit was covered, every angle blocked, every escape route closed. They weren't in Small's paradise making a deal. They were in a cage. Vinny's hand slowly withdrew from his jacket. He looked at Bumpy with something new in his eyes. Not respect exactly, but recognition. Recognition that he'd misjudged the situation, misjudged the man, misjudged the power dynamics entirely. "This isn't over," Vinny said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "Yes," Bumpy said quietly, "it is." Vinny and his associates backed toward the door, not running, pride wouldn't allow that, but moving with purpose, moving with the understanding that every second they stayed was a second closer to not leaving at all. The crowd parted for them, silent, watching. These weren't cheers or jeers, just witnessing. Historical moments don't always come with fanfare. Sometimes they come with jazz music and cigarette smoke and the sound of 3 men's footsteps on hardwood floors. When the door closed behind them, when the engine of their Cadillac roared to life outside, when the taillights finally disappeared down 7th Avenue, only then did the room exhale. The jazz trio picked up the tempo. Conversations resumed. Wilt Chamberlain sat back down, laughing about something. Julius poured drinks with hands that no longer shook. Life returned to Small's paradise, like blood rushing back to a limb that had fallen asleep. But at the corner booth, Bumpy Johnson sat perfectly still, his cognac finally finished, his eyes distant. Junie Bird leaned in. "They'll be back." "No," Bumpy said quietly. "They won't." "How do you know?" "Because Vinny's going to go back downtown and tell his bosses exactly what happened. And his bosses are going to look at the math, the cost of going to war in Harlem, the cost in soldiers and money and political capital, and they're going to realize it's not worth it. Not for 30%, not for 70%, not for anything." Nat Pettigrew put his glasses back on. "You made them look weak in front of witnesses. Italian families don't forget that." "They don't forget," Bumpy agreed,
but they also don't make emotional decisions. That's what separates them from street thugs. They understand cost-benefit analysis. And war with Harlem, real war, block by block, building by building, costs more than any drug operation or numbers racket could possibly profit. So they'll just leave us alone? Junie asked, skeptical. They'll respect boundaries, Bumpy corrected. They'll focus on neighborhoods where they already have infrastructure, where the population is already scared or compliant. Harlem isn't that place. We've been organizing for decades. Marcus Garvey, the churches, the cultural centers. We have identity. We have unity. That's something you can't buy, and you can't conquer easily. Nat made a note in his little leather book. What about that phrase, "You're already dead, you just don't know it yet"? Where did that come from? Bumpy smiled slightly, the first break in his calm exterior all night. Old samurai saying, read it in a book. Figured it would land better than explaining the logistical complexity of defending a hostile neighborhood against determined resistance. Junie laughed, finally relaxing. Worked, didn't it? It worked, Bumpy confirmed.
But not because it was clever. It worked because it was true. The moment Vinny walked in here with that attitude, with that word, with those threats, that moment he became dead to Harlem. Dead to any possibility of cooperation. Dead to any future where the Italians in Harlem coexist peacefully in business. He just didn't know it yet. The three men sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. Outside, Harlem continued its Friday night rhythm. Couples walking hand in hand down 7th Avenue, teenagers laughing on stoops, cars passing with music pouring from open windows. "Why'd you really let them go?" Junie finally asked. "We could have ended it right here." Bumpy looked at him with those ancient eyes. "Because I'm not trying to be the toughest. I'm trying to be the smartest. Dead bodies draw attention. Police, FBI, more Italians looking for revenge. But embarrassed wise guys who go back and tell the truth, that draws respect. Fear, yes, but also respect. And respect is what builds lasting power." Plus, Nat added, killing a Genovese capo in Small's Paradise would have turned this place into a crime scene for weeks. Ed Small would have lost his liquor license. The community would have suffered. This way, everyone goes home, the club stays open, and we send our message without creating problems for our own people. Bumpy nodded. Power isn't about how many bodies you can drop. It's about how many you don't have to. At the bar, Julius approached with a fresh cognac. He set it down in front of Bumpy without a word. Just a nod of acknowledgement, of respect, of understanding. Bumpy returned the nod. "They'll talk about tonight," Junie said, looking around the room. "Everyone in here will tell the story." "Good," Bumpy said. "Let them talk. Let the story spread. Let every Italian crew from Brooklyn to the Bronx hear about what happened when the Genovese family tried to muscle Harlem. Let them hear about the word that was used and the response it got.
Let them understand that Harlem isn't a neighborhood you take. It's a neighborhood you earn permission to operate in." "And if they don't listen?" Nat asked. "If someone decides to test you?" Bumpy's expression hardened slightly. "Then they learn the lesson the hard way. But they won't. Organized crime is a business. Businesses make rational decisions. And there's nothing rational about going to war when you've already lost the moral high ground and the tactical advantage." The jazz trio transitioned into a slower number, something melancholy and beautiful. Sarah Vaughan's Misty filtered through the smoke and conversations, a perfect soundtrack for the denouement of a drama that could have ended in blood, but ended instead in words. 6 words, to be precise. In the days and weeks that followed June 18, 1962, the story of what happened at Small's Paradise spread through Harlem like gospel. It was told in barbershops where men got their Saturday edge-ups, in beauty parlors where women processed their hair, in churches where preachers used it as a parable about dignity and respect. The Italian families did exactly what Bumpy predicted. They respected the boundaries. Oh, they still operated in New York, the unions, the ports, the garment district, but Harlem remained Harlem, independent, sovereign in its way, a black neighborhood that had looked power in the face and refused to blink. Vinny Esposito was reportedly demoted after that night, his judgment questioned, his future within the family uncertain.
The Genovese bosses didn't appreciate him creating a situation that could have exploded into a war they couldn't win without massive cost. In organized crime, like in any business, you're only as valuable as your last deal. Vinny's last deal had been a disaster. But the real lesson, the one that resonated for decades, wasn't about territory or money or even respect in the traditional sense. It was about identity.
About a community that knew itself, protected itself, represented itself. Harlem in the 1950s and 1960s was a crucible of black excellence, black resistance, black power, long before that phrase became a rallying cry. Bumpy Johnson understood that. He understood that his power didn't come from being the toughest or the most ruthless. It came from being the embodiment of Harlem's collective will. When he sat across from Benny Esposito and refused the offer, when he absorbed the slur without flinching, when he delivered those 6 words with absolute certainty, he wasn't speaking for himself. He was speaking for every black person who'd been called that word, who'd been diminished, who'd been told they were less than, who'd been offered crumbs and expected to be grateful. He was speaking for the musicians and the ministers, the numbers runners and the nightclub owners, the families struggling to pay rent, and the entrepreneurs building businesses against impossible odds. He was speaking for Harlem. And Harlem, through him, said no. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty that comes from knowing your worth, knowing your power, knowing that sometimes the smartest move is recognizing when you've already won and letting your enemy walk away with that knowledge. The 6 words Bumpy Johnson spoke that night, "You're already dead, you just don't know it yet," became legendary, not because they were a threat, but because they were a truth. The old relationship between black communities and organized crime, where power flowed one direction and respect was demanded but never given, died in Small's Paradise on June 18, 1962. It died the moment Vinny Esposito used that word. It died the moment he realized he'd miscalculated. It died the moment he understood that Harlem wasn't territory to be claimed. It was a fortress to be respected.
And it stayed dead, long after that night, long after those men, long after the jazz stopped playing and the lights went dark, and Small's Paradise eventually closed its doors for the last time in 1986. Because real power isn't measured in guns or money or territory. Real power is measured in what you build, what you protect, and what you refuse to accept. Bumpy Johnson knew that, and on June 18, 1962, he made sure the Genovese family learned it too.